Hi, Nick. I thought we could spend this morning sort of just thinking about your work around trauma, shiatsu, if I got that right, clean language and intergenerational trauma. So to sort of just dive straight into it, the question in my mind is for those encountering your work for the first time, what is words that touch and what moved you to write the book?
What moved me to write the book was actually quite a realization that between the kind of language that I'd learned as a way of working with the body and the way I'd learned to work through touch, through shiatsu and East Asian medicine, that actually I was the only person on the planet at that time who knew enough about both of those to actually write this book. And it seemed like some message from above. This is what you got to do. So I just went for it, and it took a long time and a lot of research, but it felt really important to bring those two things together. And that's why I called it Words That Touch.
Words that touch. That's really great because, like you say, you're bringing two things together. Can you just tell us a bit more about what it really is about? Something kind of pushed you or was ignited in you, if which is we spoke around having a passion, and a drive in terms of writing earlier, didn't we, as well?
Yeah. Well, there's a narrative to everything. That might be a useful way to come at it. I worked as a filmmaker for 10 years, which is not completely coincidental. That I think what I really wanted to do as a filmmaker was to use the camera as a way of seeing a person as they really are, away from all the socially constructed ways that we present ourselves. How can we actually see each other? Anyway, that didn't work out, and I realized I needed to change my profession. And I got burned out, went to an acupuncturist. She actually said to me, "You'd be quite good at something like this." And I knew I didn't want to stick needles in people, but I did discover shiatsu, which connected with an interest I'd always had in East Asian ways of thinking and movement and Tai Chi and so on. So I went for it. I did the training and loved it. It felt this kind of being touched. I mean, I could just tell this is something that my nervous system needs. This is something my body needs. And so I learned all of that and was totally inspired by teachers who could, just look at a person and know exactly what was needed there and so on. So that whole inspiration and excitement and enthusiasm to be somebody, to be able to do something that actually makes a difference, was one part of it. And then gradually, I began to realize that something was missing. And I realized that language is really, really important to me. And that was mainly my dad's influence. He, brought us up on Shakespeare and poetry and stuff. And so I started checking out the kinds of talking therapies that were interested in the body, like Milton Erickson's hypnotherapy. I learned that through the work of Steve Gilligan and a whole neuro-linguistic spectrum. Um, and eventually I then ended up with this thing called clean language, which suddenly seemed to be the real thing that worked for me because it's so simple and it fitted in. Notice how my hands are shifting because language was here first, and now it's here. It fitted in with the very sort of Zen ideas that are there embedded in shiatsu, that simplicity is everything. And so that's the story, and that's where it comes from, and it works for me. I'm not saying it's right for everybody, but it's the perfect combination for me. And that, I guess, was another thing that gave me the sense of commitment to writing the book, that this has to be done, rather than it would be nice to write a book, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Your writing doesn't try to fix people or give instructions. Why was that important to you?
I thought about this question. I mean, there are very few therapists these days who just say, "Well, I'm going to fix you." It's not,
Well, the hope
not the
is they
thing.
don't say that, but clients do come hoping that they get fixed
No,
somewhere.
absolutely. That's the motivation for
Mm,
anybody coming to any kind of therapy.
mhm,
There's something
mhm,
wrong and I need it to be put right.
mhm.
And so the where do we start with this one? It's a huge question that somebody wants to be put right. Somebody's aware that they have a problem. We as human beings, as you know, have what is called a negative bias. We tend to look at the negative in life.
Mhm.
It's not so natural for us as human beings just to think about the positives. And then we label it as Pollyannish or Mary Poppins or something like that. And so this whole question of, okay, that's what you don't want. What might it be that you do want? Is in itself a beautiful invitation to shift from the program negative bias into the possibilities that the nervous system has to offer. And this is a principle of shiatsu and that we're not looking for the pathologies, we're not treating the pathologies. We're
Right.
looking at a deeper level to where the healthy energy is. Where is the genuine healing power in this system? And how can we find it, listen to it, amplify it, connect it with the the things that aren't working, that are dysfunctional in the system, whether it's in the mind, in the emotions, in the body, in the spirit. You know,
Mm,
that's the basic principle. And I
mm.
remember when my wonderful teacher, Pauline Sasaki, a Japanese American woman, first said that in a workshop, and it was like, that's
It
what
is,
we're
isn't
doing.
it?
Yes,
It
that's what
really
we're
is.
doing here.
Yeah.
Yes, because a whole lot of acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine is based on treating pathologies. And
Right.
I knew I didn't want to do that either. So when she said that, I thought, oh, great. Yes, right. And it does kind of connect with that earlier motivation I had as a filmmaker, just to see the real person, see the authentic person,
Mhm.
be present with that.
So, in your experience, what begins to shift when someone feels deeply listened to by words and touch?
If I don't see something shifting, then I know it's not working. That's the point. Uh,
Mhm.
and that close attention to the embodied cues is the key thing. Is their voice tone shifting? Is their facial expression changing a bit? Is their breathing becoming more rhythmical, or or is it still stuck here with a diaphragm that's completely tight uh, in some sort of startle response? What's happening with their spine? They begin, and I don't just wait and see. I actually do ask somebody at the beginning, would it be okay if we just do a kind of mindful exploration, use a little mindfulness to explore what your body knows about this, whatever they've been telling me as the problem, the narrative, the doctor's diagnosis, whatever. Would it be okay if we just take some time to explore what your body knows about this or your nervous system? And I, just say, so just sit in the chair, get in a comfortable position, bring your attention to soles of your feet, the feeling of weight in the chair, all those things, a normal mindfulness induction,
Mhm.
and gradually noticing or inviting them to notice where is your attention drawn to, as you open your awareness out to this, to what your whole body knows about what's going on. And from there, either there's a sensation or there's a metaphor, an image that pops into the head, and you can begin to ask these very simple questions, which are sort of phenomenologically based questions. They're about what is actually happening in the moment. They're not theoretically based questions.
Mhm.
And that way, a person can actually begin this process, and I see something changing. And more important, I'm trying to make them notice that something's changing, because then they have the evidence, this crucial thing of evidence that the everyday narrative mind needs. Otherwise, it will just snap back into, well, um, I'm more comfortable in my old habits. Thanks very much.
Mhm.
Mm. Or that was a nice bit of body work, but uh, I've got a life to get on with, and I've got to cope. Which
Mm,
is so true
mm,
for so many people.
mm. The evidence being a level of awareness.
Yes.
Yeah, something that kind of, but it's also a practice, isn't it? That I was very struck by, you're talking about breathing here. And, most people, including me, forget to breathe, but it's something that you kind of, a bit like drinking lots of water, you have to
Mm.
constantly remind yourself that this is needed and necessary. You know what it makes me think, Nick? It makes me think about what is possible so when we're thinking about talking therapy, people maybe may want to revert back to their trauma, or you're thinking about people that come to see us, who are diagnosed or have psychosis, for example. There is often sometimes this space that they end up going to, and something about staying with the present, something about staying with what works. Not so much not allowing them to go places, but
Mm.
also, it's almost like we're trying to keep them thinking and keep them in a state of possibilities, if you like.
Possibility, yeah.
Which is what you said made me think about. So it's not kind of labeling, if you like, and trying to dig deeper into. It's a bit like trauma work, isn't it? It's so much more trauma work. Staying with that, we hear the trauma, but actually one can survive or move on. One can leap off from trauma, i.e., the body can heal itself.
The bottom line has to be this whole catchword now of co-regulation. If I can be present in a calm and resourceful way
Yeah.
with the other person when their nervous system is jangled or their mental ways of perceiving reality are not the same as mine,
Mm.
um, then a kind of chemistry begins to happen, and then that creates a human connection, which then brings us on to this other word you were using, a possibility. What starts to become possible when two people can be present with each other in that sort of way. Yeah.
I feel that's really the basis of psychotherapy, really. Of course, we can't predict anything, but it is all about possibilities. As long as two people are willing to engage and, stay with the not knowing and see what can come out of that interaction. It's like two histories fundamentally coming together, isn't it? Two unconscious processes, minds.
Yes, it is in psychotherapy.
Mm,
In clean language, it's not.
right.
And
Okay.
that's the
That's
difference, I
that's
think.
okay. So that's the bit I'm interested in. How can we
Yeah.
use what we have? Do we need to change it? And how do we tweak it? Because I think what then happens is people will take what works for them.
Yes, sure. But when you were talking to Adam Phillips, he said psychotherapy, it allows two people to see what they're able and willing to say to each other,
Hmm.
which is psychotherapy.
Hmm.
The point with clean language is almost the opposite of that. It's how can I use the simplest language that keeps all of my stuff out of the client's space to help them find out more about what's going on at deeper levels within themselves. So the word clean literally means I'm trying to keep that space of the client as clean, as clear of my stuff as possible. And in a practical sense, there's a couple of ways that works. First of all, we use the client's words exactly as we possibly can. We don't paraphrase them. We don't say, so it sounds to me like what you're saying is. We don't say anything like that. We just use the exact words and offer them back as as exactly as you can. And there's a talking about co-regulation. There's an important aspect there that the way the words are spoken, the musicality and the rhythms and the tone and the volume and everything about the sound of the words is coming back to you, hopefully, as well as the content, which takes you much more into your own nervous system when you hear that stuff coming back. Um, and that other part of the brain, one part of the brain is responsible for speaking language, and there's another part of the brain that's responsible for hearing it. So when you hear your own language back, a lot of stuff is already happening within your own
Yeah.
nervous system, um,
Yeah. I,
neurologically.
I
That's
hear
step
you.
one. Yeah.
I hear you, Nick. The only other thing is that I feel very strongly that we're not blank slates. So, as much as we might try to keep ourselves out of the space, and I do think we need to keep ourselves out of the space, it really is about, trying to help as best as we can the person that's sat in front of us. We cannot say that we're not part of the story, if you like. And I hear you when you say repeating the client, using the client's own words. That is very important because it's actually also saying to them that we're hearing them and we are responding, in the way that they know. So using their language. I don't think that there is necessarily one way. I just think that there's lots of different ways, and people can take what works at the end of the day. I don't think one system is
Yeah.
necessarily better or worse than the other. I just think, it's a bit like CBT and DBT and interpersonal therapy, and the range goes on, you know.
Yes, give me a chance, Abby. That
Have
was
I?
just step one. No, absolutely. That I'm not denying the obvious truth of psychotherapy that we are two interconnected fields, and that's where we start from before any language is spoken. I think part of the point why it's so useful for me as a bodywork therapist is because bodywork therapy is even more connected, even more intimate than psychotherapy, talking therapy. You're
Mm-hmm.
actually touching another person's body.
Mm-hmm.
And and that is so closely, creates such close connections, such intuitive sense of what's going on here. And the touch is such a immediate conveyor of what's going on for me as the therapist, as well as what's going on for the client.
Because you must be working, it must be some sort of synchronicity, I'm assuming.
Yes, very much so. And
Right.
that is why um, the clean language is such a useful tool for people who are working in that sort of way. Psychotherapy already has lots and lots of understanding of boundaries and creating space and all of that stuff. So I'm not saying this is better than psychotherapy at all. I'm just saying this is a different way of thinking about the that closeness of the intuitive, co-regulated field that we get into automatically as two people paying attention
Mm-hmm.
to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Mm-hmm.
like the clean language gives us whatever kind of therapy we're doing. It gives us a chance to put the brakes on all of that close connection stuff, the transference and the projections and so on, to
Mm-hmm.
put the brakes on that, to come out and to create a space which is there just for the client to listen to themselves
Yes.
without having too much, um, having to pay attention too much to the fact that there's somebody else there.
So if we could just go back to the shiatsu and
Mm.
trauma, and for those unfamiliar with what shiatsu is, how do you understand its relationship to safety, presence, and regulation, especially in trauma? It's not an interview.
Well, I mean,
Or shall we put it another way? What can touch offer that words alone sometimes can't?
yes, that you sent me a list of the most wonderful questions, Abby, and they've really had to think about them. And in relation to that one, I think the best way to start is to think of touch kind of in the same way we think about language, so that with words, with language, you can do lots of things. You can give directions, you can give instructions, you can tell stories, you can express affection, you can express disgust, you can do all kinds of things with language. And it's similar with touch. Touch can convey all kinds of things. You can use touch in a physical way. You can, or a chiropractor can use touch to, get a vertebra back into position, something like that. But you can also use touch to communicate all kinds of things. You can use touch to listen. another way to answer the question, I guess, would be to go back to what I said about when I started to learn shiatsu and I could feel my body needs this. Um, I think touch, because it takes us, it's there. It's pre-verbal. It's there before we learn language. It can really help to take us back to those earliest ways of being
Right.
human and connect us to our nervous systems
Mm-hmm.
in ways that words alone cannot.
Mm-hmm.
But with the caveat that, as you know, I find it really valuable to work with both words and touch, not one or the other. When I'm using the clean language process, which we can go into more for this to make sense, but
Yeah.
I'm looking for what spontaneously comes out from that person when they have agreed to make that shift from what I don't want to what I do want. And when you invite somebody into that space of possibility, then things spontaneously start coming out about memories or times in childhood when things were beautiful, a beautiful day or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things, which may be tucked away in a box that says that was then, but this is now, and my life is miserable. How do you actually get them to open that box and to reconnect with those kind of resources? And that's when you see things shifting in the body and the breath and the facial expression and posture. Everything starts to look like something is beginning to change for the,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you know, when you're talking, I'm going to move on to clean language in a minute. In the work we do, sort of psychoanalytic idea, especially with trauma, the idea is it takes time. It takes time because we don't want to dismantle, if you like, and clearly that's not really a good way to talk, but if we could just say that people's, defenses. So we need to take our time and, observe, pay attention. But when you talk about clean living and you talk about, the work you do with sort of, touch, it makes me think that the process might be a bit quicker.
a bit quicker. Well,
Well, not so much
yes. I mean, it
quicker
depends
in
on
the
your
sense
model.
of, but there is so much more going on.
Uh,
We're
I mean,
using the psyche as a way of sort of informing the
mm,
body in a way.
mm.
Um, and also, to inform people to help them think about what else they can do in the process. And they could come to you. But I'm just wondering I mean, okay, let's just, for the sake of argument, how long would you see a client? When would you say a kind of, how long would you um, expect people to come and see you for, or recommend that people come to see you for?
Well, you're absolutely right. Change takes time, and
Hmm.
we live in a quick fix culture.
Hmm.
So you're already kind of moving against the tide of the culture that we're in when you're doing change work. Um, but just, I mean, on the spectrum of traditional Freudian psychoanalysis, where you go 2 times a week for X number of years,
Hmm.
that's one end of the spectrum.
Hmm.
For me, in a practical sense, I say every session is self-contained, and it's for you to decide what you've got from that session and whether you want to come back for another one.
Right.
And if a person has any kind of chronic thing, I would usually say, well, let's do 3 sessions weekly, maybe, or maybe monthly even, before we decide where to go next with this.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I think that, I mean, obviously with touch work, whatever kind it may be, it's just so immediate and direct and powerful. You feel a
Yeah.
lot better at the end of the
Yeah.
session.
Yes.
But
And they
that
can
can,
tell you that.
yes. So
Yes.
in that sense, it's nice. But the
Hmm.
mind can so easily forget about that or negate
Hmm.
it. They can leave
Hmm.
the session, and by the time they got stuck in a traffic jam, it's all
Hmm.
gone.
Hmm.
And what is the real change that happened at a deeper level? That's the
Yes.
question.
We don't know, do we? I mean, and it reminds me of a course or training. I don't know how to describe it, where I went for a whole week to this center somewhere in London, Battersea. I can't remember where it was exactly. And it was sort of mindfulness meditation where you went in and you did a lot of, healthy eating and sort of a lot of mindfulness exercises. Nobody was talking to anybody for the full day. And then I stepped out and got on the train, and I just found the world so busy, from actually having had, like, I don't know, 6 hours of silence. I guess it's a bit like going to one of these monasteries or, ashram, like people do in India. And then coming out and then sort of having to face the world. But we do need to face the world, don't we? So I think this is what you're saying, something about we're not static beings.
But it's what kind of world are we facing? And as Gabor Mate says, we live in a pathological world. The world that we face is not a healthy world to face. If you came out of a Indian ashram into a more traditional kind of village community, that wouldn't have been such a shock.
No. Do you think we're then just sort of plastering um, pain, suffering, and sending people back out there? I mean, I know that's a bit of a far-fetched way of looking at things, but there is something to be said for the culture and the environment we live in currently.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I'm involved in at the moment is an online group of different, not therapists, some are therapists, but different practitioners of various things, about how to bring a mindful approach to facing the multiple crises that we're in as a human race. And that does give some meaning to what I do, because if I thought, well, I'm just seeing individual people one-to-one while the world collapses around me, what's happening? What's the point?
Mm,
And I think, of course, a lot of us, all of us are facing that at the moment. How can I meaningfully
mm,
contribute to turn things around,
mhm,
especially in the face of such massive denial from the those in authority? That
mhm,
that's really important.
mhm.
But on the other hand, there's that wonderful Hebrew saying, "He who saves a single life saves the world entire."
Right.
That the preciousness of human connection, that
Mm,
has to inform us in the way we come out to save the world. If you come out to save the world just as a militant hater of everything that's currently in existence, then it's not going to work. And that's one of the things we're doing in the mindful in the group, the online group that I'm part of, is
mm,
trying to create what Martin Luther King called beloved communities. That
mm,
was an idea that he had, was just to invite people to get together locally and create what he called beloved communities. In other words, that there would be a sense of communion within the group
mm,
before you go out, say, to do civil rights work in his days, or whatever, before you go out to chain yourself to a railing against climate change.
mm,
Um, Creating that sense of community, to invite people to create local communities where we can genuinely be present with each other
mm.
in a caring way. And then what can we do together
What can we do
to
together?
make a difference in the world?
Clean language is central to your work. What makes it especially relevant when working with trauma?
I work with trauma. It's almost like the other way around. It's the more I started to practice clean language, the more clients started to come to me directly consciously wanting to work with trauma. I mean, almost everyone who comes to therapy has some trauma somewhere tucked away, but very
This is
often they
what I
don't.
think about trauma. Sorry to
Yeah.
interject there, because I think when we use the word trauma, people think, God, it's a big word, isn't it? And
Mm.
nobody wants to think, I'm sort of affected by it, or trauma belongs to other people in war-torn countries. But the way I see trauma is, birth, giving birth is a form of trauma. So experiencing or witnessing things happening in the world in a
Yes,
way we're actually partaking in something, whether we know it or not,
yes.
or acknowledge it or not. So,
So did you say giving birth is a form of trauma?
mm,
Yes, exactly. I mean, we're used to thinking of birth as a trauma, the transition from womb to uh, life.
mm,
But giving birth, that's a very good point because
mm,
giving birth is very traumatic, can be very traumatic for the whole bodily system, nervous system, and beyond.
mm,
But it's being done for the wonderful reason of bringing new life into the world.
mm,
And it's like, and I've often thought about this, it's like you can experience the same amount of trauma giving birth as you would if somebody was torturing you to get secrets out of you for the CIA. But because it's being done for this amazing and miraculous purpose of bringing life into the world, it creates a whole different frame around how you approach it.
mm,
And in a way, that's kind of what I guess that I was saying before about helping someone connect to the resources. What really brings you joy in life? What
mm.
makes life worth living?
Yes,
Even though that may take ages as a process to do, it
yeah,
creates a different approach to that history of trauma that a person has stored in their nervous
yes.
system.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I really think that's so important. And I feel that that's the key, really, to moving on. What brings you joy? Everything else might be, and we are all affected by the disaster. But what brings you joy? What makes life worth living? And I wonder whether, that's really what when we use the word healing, no one, we're kind of healing one another, but that becomes the impetus, if you like, trying to locate something around that.
What brings you joy is it.
Hmm, hmm.
Uh, no further questions, Your Honor. I don't think I have anything else to say about that. Um, the I can tell you a story. Recently, I attended a 3-day workshop on therapeutic clowning, taught by this wonderful woman who goes into hospitals where kids are there in the wards, sick or bewildered, or you know, just at the end of their tether. And she also goes into dementia homes and works with people who are living in that kind of reality. And her job is just to connect at this very in the moment human level with what is going on subtly with a person. A kid might be crying, but at the same time, there might, she can just poke her head around the door, do something a bit silly, and the child starts to get curious. And then she goes with that beginning of a connection, does something else that is funny. Um, and everything changes, and there's human connection. Or with dementia, she she instead of what the person's relatives do, which is to come in and say, "What did you have for lunch?" and the person can't remember, and everything spirals downwards from there. She just makes that same kind of in the moment connection with what is that person's reality right now, and brings a kind of life into them that wasn't there before. And so I did this course because I was just really curious
Mm,
about how could this help me in being present with my clients.
mm.
And the idea of joy there is this: clowning is not about trying to make people laugh.
No,
Clowning is about finding how that to bring joy into the moment, and then
yes,
the laughter comes from that. And you do
yeah.
that through genuine human presence and willingness to connect.
Mm,
So that was a great way for me to refresh my ideas about what am I actually doing here.
you
I
know.
think that's what keeps me going in terms of working with trauma, because it can
Mm,
be really tough. And
hmm.
unless you take care of yourself, you can get secondary trauma from seeing too many traumatized patients or clients.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's kind of somewhere in the background, if I'm working with trauma, is that sense, where's the joy? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and that's one reason why I'm very interested in thinking about the performing arts and creative arts as a metaphor for
Mm-hmm.
working with trauma, because in the creative arts, you've got to have trauma. You've got to start with a trauma. You've got to have a story here. You've got to have something people care about. You know, someone's
Yeah.
got to die, whatever. There's got to be some trauma in here. Otherwise, the audience are going to go home. So you start from there, but you begin to engage with it. You begin to play with it. You begin to allow
Mm-hmm.
creativity to come into the space,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, that was through music, through acting, whatever, through painting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and then things begin to change.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that creativity thing is the essential stepping stone from the trauma to the joy, that we need
Mm-hmm.
to bring an individual's creativity alive and into the
Mm-hmm.
space.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I was talking about, where are that person's resources, where are the positive things in their emotional landscape or narrative landscape of their life. Where are the positive things, and how can we reconnect with those?
Okay. Well, thank you so very much, Nick.
Okay, I mean, it's been really helpful to think about those questions that you sent me. It made me think harder than I had to think for a long time. And I'd love to have another conversation at some point if that is useful. But anyway, just many thanks for that. Yeah. And I hope people have got some idea of why it matters so much to me to bring these two things together.
Oh, for sure. There's a lot in there to take away.
Okay.